All right, guys, thanks so much for tuning in. I have the privilege today to be paired here with Lauren Ammon, and she has an extensive background in being an elite athlete. She is now a mindset coach for herself, helping athletes take their performance to the next level. She has her own business, which is Reimagined Performance, and it's something that is helping a lot of athletes that have been through the steps we're trying to get to and reach those new heights to maximizing our opportunities. So thank you so much, Lauren, for tuning in. And I'm looking forward to have a really good chat.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Julian. I'm so excited to be here.
Perfect. Now, let's just give the listeners a little bit of a background of your experiences, your knowledge, the journey you've gone through so far. You've also been in different fields other than sports too, and just give them some information about, your story and how it pertains to the mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was a swimmer for almost 2 decades. I started swimming when I was 5, and then I ended when I was 22 from Eastern Michigan University, which is the D1 program here in the US. I loved everything about it, though I would say my biggest Achilles heel was my mindset. I was a perfectionist. Everything always had to be just so. And if I didn't reach my expectations, which were wildly too high, then, the whole world came crashing down. And when I retired, I remember thinking, gosh, I could have been so much more had I just been able to get out of my own head. But like any athlete, right, you retire and you can't go back and you have to move on. Went into corporate America, had a career in human resources, found that really just wasn't my space. I got introduced to professional coaching. I went and got my certification after a year, founded my business, and it was about 18 months into my business. I had this aha moment of, while I was watching the 2020 Olympics, it was the night that Simone Biles removed herself from competition, and all that rigmarole and hoopla that was on social media. And then it was the same night that Katie Ledecky won gold in the 1500 meter freestyle. Yes. The first time that women ever got to swim it. She didn't have the greatest swim. She was about 20 seconds off of her world record. And then shortly that night, Michael Phelps came on, and who has always been a big proponent of athlete mental well-being, and said, competing is really overwhelming. We just want someone to talk to. We just want someone who listens, who allows us to be vulnerable, allows us to be ourselves, and doesn't want to fix us. And I thought, yeah, that's 100% it. Bingo. And so in that moment, I completely transitioned my business to really work with elite high school and college level athletes to train their minds like they train their bodies.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Obviously, such an extensive background, right? You even said you ventured into corporate America, where it's, again, high performance, very competitive, and it can get a little bit mean at times, just like how sports can feel. So it is interesting that you have also that background to be able to show things pertain to other fields. Even though you become an athlete, you make it to a certain level, the skills you learn along the way actually do carry over into other niches, which is amazing, right? And we have to also teach a lot of these high school students and collegiate athletes that there's a small percentage that get to make this a career to play their sport for a living. So you do have to keep the realism in check and want to make sure you are focused on education as well, because there could be an injury that comes. There could be that person who takes your spot. And how are you going to be able to handle moving into what we call regular life now? And for some athletes, they've never had a job other than playing a sport. So definitely it can be very hard on your mental health. And it can seem like the world's crashing down, that all your dreams and goals all of a sudden are done. And it's like, well, now I just got to be behind in the curve from all my friends who now have a good job or what it may be. And it feels like you're playing catch up. So when it comes to emotions, especially in the journey, you mentioned, you were so hard on yourself. It was all about all or nothing. And for myself, I can feel that too, because I was that person that I wanted to be at practice first. I was willing to be the last one to leave the field. I wanted to put in extra work because I knew I had so many people around me said, you have all this talent. If you don't work hard, you're not going to be able to compete with those next level. So it gave me the idea, well, I got to always be hungry. And sometimes you burn candles from both ends, right? You kind of work too hard, and then you kind of go out and play a little too hard, and then you're trying to bring both together, and it seems like you're not in balance. And that's where the emotional roller coaster, I find, really sets in play, where your mood doesn't always feel positive because you're not feeling energetic. And you still got to go out and compete and practice and feel like you're getting the most out of yourself. But how do you not have that negative self-talk that when you're having those times where you're not feeling your best, that you still are happy with being in the process and enjoying that whole journey? How would you feel about that?
Yeah, Similar to you, I mean, I was a distance swimmer, so it was almost like I had to work a little bit more. And I don't mean that as like a badge of honor. I mean, I was literally just swimming more than a lot of my teammates. And so
Hmm.
I often was tasked with additional yardage or a little bit longer practices simply because that's how my body responded. I think I was more of like a true endurance athlete. Like I think open water swimming might have been great for me.
Hmm.
But I had that energy. So I would say when I was an athlete, I don't know that I felt that I was burning the candles at both ends. I think because I found my space. The emotional roller coaster for me in sport was more about the high expectations I had for myself, that every time I got into the pool, it had to be a PR, or what I called at the
Hmm.
time an LTB, a lifetime best. Even if I was in the throes of training where literally my body was supposed to be broken down and not performing at my peak, at least in a meet.
Hmm.
However, when I got into corporate America, that's where I felt that I was burning the candle at both ends, almost because, and I didn't know this at the time, it took me a while to figure this out, it was almost because I didn't have a, there wasn't that same level of outlet to get the natural energy that I have out. And so it was
Yeah,
like, I would take this
definitely.
on and take this on and take this on and take this on and take this on, right? I mean, in corporate America, you're not necessarily, obviously, doing the same level of physical intensity, but it's like that mental
Super
intensity that
mental.
comes.
Yeah.
And that's where I felt that I was burning the candles on both ends. And actually, in corporate America, I felt more of an emotional roller coaster
Hmm.
than I did as an athlete. And that was some big ahas for me of like, oh,
Am I doing the right thing? Yeah.
yeah, exactly. That was the big kind of moment of, as you were saying, like being able to transfer. And I think my big aha was, oh, one, I didn't know that I could. And two, kind of whatever natural path I took in corporate America was almost against what I learned in sport in
Right,
some way.
right. But in sport, you felt like you had that outlet, right? You could go into the pool and you could get it out, and you felt
Yes.
refreshed when you got out almost. Even though you have
Yes.
this perfectionist mindset, which so many athletes do, especially elite athletes. Because
Mhm.
growing up our whole lives, we've been successful. We were that athlete who stood out from the bunch. And then all of a sudden, you get to a level where you're competing with people just like you. And now it's like, well, how do I deal with this a little bit, right? It can be a little bit, I guess, over inducing to deal with at times because you're so used to having a lot of success. And even if
Yeah.
you don't win, you're like second or third, and you're kind of like, well, that's good, but I also want to be always first. So it's a tough one. And
Yeah.
it's definitely interesting when you climb the ladder. Now, of course, when you're going through the process too, I know for myself, I had a similar mindset when I would be in the cages, when I'd be in practice, taking batting practice. It was like every ball I hit had to be perfect. It was like I was already in the game. It had to feel like I never miss hit a ball. And if I stepped out of the cage and I miss hit something, I was so hard on myself. It was like, what are you doing? Like this needs to be perfect. So I understand from that aspect how that carries over into other sports, that you always want to be seeing like you're doing perfect all the time and you have this high standard, which is very impossible to live up to because your body just at times it physically can't. Like you're just so beaten down that it's impossible at times. You have to almost be very self-compassionate and friendly and just like, okay, today's one of those days, maybe we dial down the intensity, we get that work in and keep maintenance flowing, but at the same time, we just be realistic, right? And that's
Mm-hmm.
something now that we can preach towards the kids, that it's important to know the days when to dial it up and when to dial it back, but as well, you're still moving in the right direction. So that's
Mm-hmm.
awesome. I appreciate that. Now,
Yeah.
as well, having, coaches and family members and friends and teammates who all have opinions of what is right for you or, your opinion compared to theirs. How would you say the opinions along the journey kind of swayed you in different directions, or were you really good at staying along with your own opinion and not letting others kind of get into your head?
Oh no. My superpower is allowing other opinions to influence me. And it's actually that question. I love that question, and to be able to say, no, I was not great at that, because I had an
Mhm.
aha moment maybe maybe about a year ago. where I came to this conclusion of, gosh, why am I so frustrated? And through a series of events and interactions, it was, well, because I'm going against what I know to be right for me. And what I've learned about myself is I am I feel a lot into life. Like I'm a very moment to moment person. And what
You're
I've
very in the
kind of come,
present. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. And I'm really good at knowing what's good for me in the present, but I'm also very, very susceptible to inspiration and like getting ideas from others. And
Mhm.
what I've had to learn is to okay, well, what idea is really the one that feels right for me? Because I'm very good at convincing myself logically, oh, I could do that, I could do that, I could do that, when really it's not something I want or something I'm good at. And that has been, as an adult, my biggest learning opportunity, because I recognized when it happened to me as a swimmer, because in my mind it was, well, this is my coach. They have a deeper understanding of the sport. Of course, they're going to lead me in the right direction. And it's not that they weren't leading me in the right direction. It's just that maybe the direction was more suited for them or for another
Exactly.
swimmer
Yeah.
versus me. And I didn't have the awareness at the time to stop and say, whoa, 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 wait. I know myself better than anybody else. I'm the one who's swimming this race. Like most of my coaches were male. He can give me suggestions, but I've got to be able to play with this a little bit. And
Yeah.
that was one of the biggest aha moments. I love practice. I mean, I was a practice
Absolutely.
phenom because practice was my playground. But what I didn't put together was, it was my playground to figure out what was going to work best for me, because we didn't necessarily at the time do a ton of mimic meets. I mean, yes, we did race
Yeah.
pace and, we got in the feeling of what it was like to swim that fast, but we didn't like incorporate the conditions of meets into practice to be
The
able to kind of
pressure.
play.
Yeah.
Yes. And
Yes.
how I could make that work for me. So long story short, no, I am not good at not allowing other people in. So that's what I've been working on as an adult, is to take it in, appreciate it, and say, wait a minute, does that work? Does not work.
A lot of filtering. And I can
Yes.
appreciate that too, because for my side, growing through my pains, I had an issue at times with listening to opinions and then not listening to opinions in two different directions. There was times when I should have listened and I was like, oh, I've had people tell me things and it didn't work. So then it was actually something good for me and beneficial. But because I had another experience, I stopped listening to this opinion. But then I always was told, listen to your coaches. They have a different understanding. You have a set of eyes from a different perspective. You should hear them out. And I always wanted to try what they were saying, especially in baseball. There's all these mechanics of hitting a ball, all these different ideas of where you want to throw and what you want to think. And you want to try it all, especially going through the high school elite development. You're still feeling out what works best for your body. And everyone sees you from a different angle of like, try this, well, try that, put your hands here, put them down here, do this, do that. And it's really, hard to, I guess, fathom what's going to be the best, because you could do something a few times and it gets results. And then all of a sudden you face better competition and it doesn't work against that, right? There's some vulnerability within it. And then you try again and it has some results. And then again, the same thing. So you almost have to stick with something, have failure, and then like tinker through it to see it then reach that point. So I definitely struggled as well with absorbing certain opinions that then were kind of against what worked for me. And
Yeah.
then it made it hard on my own psyche, where I'm like not trusting myself, overthinking, right? Starting to put more pressure on myself. Then I'm getting anxious and letting the nerves start to set in when it shouldn't be. And then there's the times where people are telling me something really great. And I'm like, oh, if I listen to them, it's going to happen again. It's like I'm going to go through this circle around the world. And sure enough, there was times I didn't. So I can definitely see aligned with that very much.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's a tough one for athletes, because there is people who have really good intentions for you. They want to see you
Yes.
succeed, but sometimes what works for them doesn't always work for you. You can take the information and find a way to kind of adjust it and change the approach maybe, but there's always what works for one person doesn't work for another. And I use this for my baseball athletes. Is there's so many guys that have all these different mechanics to their swing, but if you look at the actual smoothness or the path they're taking, it's all the same. Just where they start and how they finish is a little bit different, because that's how
Yeah.
their body needs to figure it out. And I'm
Mhm.
sure, in the pool, they're saying like, this is the only way to swim, and this is when you got to breathe, and this is how you do it. But some people might be faster, doing it a little bit different from the norm, right?
Mhm.
And athletes have to feel comfortable with knowing like, this is what my body does well with. This is what it's suited for. I'm going to hear what you're saying. I'm going to give it a try, maybe take a little bit of it, but from there, apply what I know works best. And it's challenging, definitely challenging,
Yeah.
especially when you're young, right? You're very vulnerable, and you
Yes.
see your coaches as these older individuals. They've been around the sport for a long time. You're like, they must know the answer. This must be the way. But realistically, it's not always like that. And it's
Mm-mm.
being very respectful to always have an understanding, to listen to them, but at times know in practice to try things and be like, well, that doesn't really work well for me. I'm going to do what I know works best and keep
Mhm.
going forward in that. So that's pretty cool, though. I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah.
Now, again, still talking about opinions and all these things, there's the illusions now, of course, of social media and how we're going to process all that information, and just seeing like what supports each individual in the goals they're trying to achieve. Because some people like to listen to certain motivational speakers or certain types of coaches and get all this information. But as well, a lot of social media is an illusion, right? How would you tell athletes to filter that information and as well keep their mental health in check, that they're staying away from the things that don't really serve them?
Yeah. A number of different things. One, be mindful of how much it's sucking you in, because it's almost kind of
Mhm.
designed to suck you in.
Absolutely.
Um, and in those moments where, I don't know if you're like this, but I've even in my adult life, right? Because social media, thank God, came out after college, because, who knows what would have been on the internet at that
Yep.
moment. But even as an adult, I find myself when I start to feel myself compare, or I start to get that twinge of, oh, well, wait a minute. It's like stress just when you can, however you experience stress, you can start to feel that.
Yeah.
That's the signal for me. Put it down,
Yeah.
put it down, because, there was also this, story with my children the other day. They wanted to do something that they saw on like YouTube or something, and it did not go well at all.
Yeah.
And that's what's kind of the lesson for them of, while your intentions were good and it was a or not necessarily a science experiment, but just something you wanted to try that you saw, like, unfortunately, not everything you see on the internet is 100% to what actually can happen or will happen.
Yes.
And particularly with athletes, it's that idea of that great internal drive to always want to improve, to be better than you were the day before. That's when that comparison concept can really kick in, is because you're seeing all of these things. Really, what you're seeing is what people want you to
Yes.
see.
Yes.
And you don't necessarily have the mental maturity. And I see this even as an adult, like I can get sucked in of, well, that looks odd. Why do they have that and I don't? I'm like, whoa, 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 wait a minute.
Mm-hmm.
They're allowing me to see what I want to see, and I'm making a conclusion based off that without having maybe a 0.5% of actually what's going on or what truly is
Right. Very
reality.
skewed. Yeah.
Yes. And so, I don't even allow my children, my 12-year-old has a cell phone, but I will not allow him to have social media, simply because I don't believe that his brain is yet there to be able to handle it and to take it in a
Yes.
very healthy way. And I really work with my athletes that if they're starting to see, or their talk track is going down of social media, that's when we take a halt and say, okay, let's process what you're experiencing and how that's affecting you, so that you can create a separation for yourself.
Absolutely. That's a great plan. That's definitely needed, because social media is so much trickery. And as you said, it can create imposter syndrome, where
Yeah.
they start comparing and they see what they believe is happening. So they start following that trend. And before you know it, it's starting to hurt their mental health, or it's really just making them go down a road that's not realistic. Right. And I believe for sure that the younger generation should be halted from being on social media until they're in their high school years or so, where they can have those deeper conversations with their parents and understand, I saw this on Instagram. Is this like real? Is this what the reality of things are? And it's like, maybe not, but you have to understand how to take things with a grain of salt. And until
Mhm.
the brain's developed to a certain age, they can't even understand that thing. It's just like, you talk about fairy tales or watching television and they see it as real, right? So there's a certain age definitely to be able to breach away from that. But that's interesting as well, definitely. Now, taking in the social media, for sure, this plays into mental health, right? And you mentioned Simone Biles and Michael Phelps, just really amazing athletes who eventually came out and said, like, hey, I am dealing with something behind the scenes that is making it potentially not just for performance, but for me as an individual struggling with day-to-day challenges and the tasks you need to do, because, you know, the way that the world is putting all this pressure on them, it feels like they have to always be this image. They have to be that illusion that people are seeing on social media, on Instagram, all that good stuff, because they've been set in that light and they're put on the pedestal. And it's hard to live in that limelight when you're consistently so focused on your practice and competing, and that's all you really want to do. And it's nice and dandy to be in the spotlight, but realistically it's not all that it's cut out to be. And being a professional athlete is not all the glitz and the glamour of just being on TV. There's so much behind the scenes that athletes don't know, and until they get there, then they go like, whoa, this is way harder than I expected. Is this actually what I want to do? This is a way of living. This is not just a job. This is not a career. Like, you have to have so much passion of what you're doing to handle all those pressures and handle in the right way that you're still keeping your mental health in check. So for yourself along your journey, was there any like techniques or mindfulness practices that helped you keep your mental health in a better space? Or, you know, was there journaling or anything you find that kept your mental health in a positive mindset?
I admittedly, when I was growing up, no, like when I was an athlete, that wasn't on the radar. Never talked about,
It's just
never.
coming out for the last couple of years. Yeah.
Yeah. And I would say, but when I look now and I look at practices now, you know, I tend to, I'm an experimenter. So like I'll try something, if it doesn't work, I move on. Meditation, it can, I adore meditation because it offers an opportunity just to like take a literal deep breath and just kind of separate yourself.
Yeah.
Though I also have to be feeling it that day. There are times when I know that I'm not going to necessarily always be able to turn it off. And so there are times when I know that it's the right thing for me to do. So I lean into that. Journaling is another one. I love it because there are times when I'll just free flow of consciousness and all of a sudden something will come up and I'll be like, oh, that's where that came from. Right. You know, that just kind of like aha moment.
Yep.
Although again, not necessarily my most consistent practice. But what I found in my adult life, the one that is consistent, and it is a form of mindfulness that maybe a lot of people don't necessarily connect to, is working out.
I was just
For
going to mention
me,
that. Yeah. I figured you were going to lead towards that. Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, when I was talking about like when I was a swimmer, it was this opportunity. I for whatever reason, I'm born with a astronomical amount of energy. And in order to find balance for myself, both physically and mentally, it does take an intense workout. And for me, an intense workout is my heart rate is getting up and I am giving off a ton of, or I'm utilizing a ton of energy. And, you know, I can often get down on myself in a practice like meditation because people are like, oh yeah, my mind went so clear. I was meditating for 45 minutes. I'm like, oh my God, if I meditated for 45 minutes, I think I would, my brain would explode. But where I find those same kind of benefits is in something like running for me. They're running for whatever reason, because of that cadence and that rhythm. Like once I'm finally into it, that's when my brain literally goes.
It just becomes still.
Yes. And all of a sudden it's just this like this wave of calm, despite the fact my body is, you know, kind of hauling ass
doing
here.
an action. Yeah.
Yes. But for me, that's where I found my greatest mindfulness as an adult. And so when I say when I wasn't doing it, when I was younger, I was every single day in the pool. I just didn't make that connection, but also swimming had a different role in my life at the time.
Right. Definitely. Yeah. And I can agree because for myself, I love meditation. It's something I try to practice every day. It depends on how I'm feeling for the day. If it's 15, 20 minutes, or if it's more 45 minutes to an hour, I've been able to kind of dive into both.
See?
But it's definitely, you know, I've used things over the years of different frequencies and sounds, and as well as sound bowls and all the different tips and techniques you can add with meditation to help you feel like time kind of passes by faster. And what I noticed is when I meditated more, time in general, the perception of it changed. Whereas I'd be doing things and it would naturally feel like time was going faster. Kind of like when you're having fun, it seems like time goes fast. And when you're doing something you don't like, it's going very slow. Right. So meditation at the start, years ago for me, for 10 minutes felt like 30 minutes, right? Felt so slow, but it was because my mind was so overstimulated and it was so sped up that just naturally when you're doing things that are very still, it seems very off. So it was like you had to kind of battle through that first hurdle to then get to the point where you start to feel like you're enjoying the process, and meditation is really setting in. And it's a skill. It definitely is like anything, like doing yoga or even working out. Like there is a skill aspect to it. For myself, I like to do cycling. So I like to do road biking. I haven't been much into the mountain biking, but definitely I do a lot of group rides and long distance. And it's that key component of being in nature, just being in the present. You have to be very in the moment, especially in group riding. You're close to each other and you have to be very focused, right? But it's almost like my mind is very still, yet still doing all this analysis and little quirky things just to make sure I'm safe and going in the direction. But it's almost feeling like meditation in motion, right? And it's once you start adding in the practices of certain stillness with in motion, you learn how to control your mind when you're doing an action and when you're just being still. And I believe there's a good balance of both that helps the body just heal and as well be in a good conscious state, that you're making good decisions, you're more logical, you're more at ease, you're peaceful. So naturally, you're going to make better decisions in life, right? When you come to a certain crossroads where you can allow anger to arise, or you can allow, certain pain to set in, you can kind of reflect and you learn to step back and have a more objective view, even being stoic at times where you kind of disconnect from emotions and you're like, that's where logic sets in, right? And I know for a lot of people, younger, older, they're very attached to their emotions, and their emotions almost are their reactions. But it's like doing these mindfulness practices, especially as athletes, you find the ones that work best for you. I always recommend to my clients or athletes, it's like start your day with a nice little reflection or some journaling and meditation, and start your day with intent. Be very grounded and have your gratitudes and the things you're ambitious about and what you're going to have for the day and achieve, so that you set yourself up for success and you're not kind of just like going through limbo of like, well, I could do this or I could do that. And then almost feels like you're unsure of what you achieve. So that's very helpful. And I see the same connection as like running, but I just like to bike. I used to run a lot, but I found like running on pavement was just destroying my knees. So I was like, I'm going to move to biking. And then now I kind of do some team triathlons and getting to some duathlons and different sports. But the competitive nature, such a cool community to start talking to triathletes and Ironman, and you talk about mental toughness and training, and their high standards for themselves. It's a really interesting community to start diving into, and it's really nice to hear stories from all different athletes, because individual sports versus team sports, it's just there's different ways about achieving the same goals, but still high performance, a lot of competition. And especially when you're doing sports that you're on your own, especially you're in the pool, it's like, yeah, you're part of a team, but this is you out there, right? I played baseball. If I went out there and struck out, well, I got the guy on deck who can come and do the job for me. So it's a little bit different. And by playing other sports, I'm starting to get into tennis now and doing other individual sports with my girlfriend. There's like so much. It's like, if you can't control your emotions, or you let that last shot kind of deter your thoughts, then all of a sudden it just starts spiraling even faster than what I experienced in baseball. So it's even cool to see how that plays over. But no, that's really interesting though. I appreciate you sharing about that for sure. Now, is there ways you would say along the journey for you that you developed your mindset without even realizing you were developing it? Like the ability to have tenacity and having a little bit more grit, or having certain resilience to things that people weren't telling you. You kind of just naturally did it.
That is an excellent question. Well, I think mindset is something that, gosh, I'm contemplating this question now. I think mindset is actually a beautiful and yet sometimes scary balance between intention and conditioning, right? Allowing kind of the outside influences kind of come in. In the realm of tenacity and resilience, as I look back over my journey, those were the ones that kind of just came and were.
Yeah.
From a tenacious standpoint, my husband and my mom always joke, like, I don't know where sometimes you get the internal drive that you have in order to
That
like get up and
intrinsic
do it.
motivation.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's that intrinsic motivation. And the biggest aha moment for me was I didn't necessarily believe that that was that cool or special or, different than anybody else until I started looking at my children and I had that aha moment of like, I was starting to want and drive for them more than they were exhibiting. And I thought,
Hmm.
oh, maybe there it is. Right. And that
Hmm.
idea that, I didn't always know I had this level of energy. I just thought it came from like, just whatever until I
Yep.
realized, oh, wait a minute, that is one part of my superpower, but at the same time can be a huge detriment to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So things like tenacity and resilience, I feel like those kind of just naturally came along the way. And quite honestly, actually, though, the negative self-talk was something that I kind of developed myself. And, my mom always used to say, I I'm not going to talk to you after a race, not because I don't have anything to say, but because I know if it wasn't what you wanted, there was so much dialogue going on in your mind that any contribution I had was only going to make it worse, even if I was trying to support you.
Yes.
And what I really appreciated about my parents is that they were not athletes. They still are not athletes. And so there was that beautiful separation that they couldn't relate to, but at the same time, they knew me well enough to give me the space or give me the kick in the pants to get out of it. Right.
Yeah.
Eventually I would
Yeah.
get to the point where I was like so sick of my own self-talk and be like, okay, I got to do something else. But that's what it was, just like, I'm going to move on, but I was never really processing it.
Yeah.
So, that question kind of meandered because it was a great question. I've never, given a ton of thought to it, but I think your mindset is just something that, comes along the way. It's kind of like culture, right? It's always going to be there, whether you intentionally create it or you don't.
Definitely. Yeah, the conditioning plays a huge part, right?
Yeah.
And your own intentions. Of course, there can be differences between like where you live, which is your natural culture and environment, because there's always that conditioning, your social conditioning, and then you add in your emotional, your spiritual, your physical. There's all these different conditioning, and your parents play a role, the
Mhm.
school you go to, your teachers. Like there's so many variables that do change what your conditioning is like. And that could be set on a certain mindset of being more growth oriented, being more process oriented, or there could be times where people around you are very result based. So then you get caught in just focusing on the results and not seeing laying one brick at a time that builds that path, right? So
Mhm.
definitely there can be those two differences for sure. Now, with your process, dealing
Mhm.
with failure, but as well dealing with adversity and success, how would you find yourself coping with all of them? Because there's so many ways to deal with adversity, but then what happens when you fail during that adversity? But what happens when you have success? You know what I mean? How was your mindset when you're going through that as well?
Yeah, when it came to failure, that's when it got me a lot. That's when I would spiral out of control, and that
Absolutely.
I
I can
had
understand
yeah,
that.
so high expectations that my mom always used to tell me, like, the ceiling you're setting for yourself is so unreasonably high. It's no wonder that you're feeling the way you are because you're expecting way too much of yourself. So failure was always a tough one for me in a hole, a very deep hole that I would put myself in. Um, Adversity, I would say that I handle adversity fairly well, right? I
Mhm.
have this like intuitive, like, I know this sucks and I don't want to go through it, but I know on the other end, it's that optimism, right? I know on the other end it'll be okay. So adversity, I don't necessarily feel as if I would get as deep, but success and failure were very much obviously two sides of the same coin. And there were times that I could get in just as deep of a hole when it came to success as I could for failure, because it was, oh, well, I did achieve what I want. Okay, so I absolutely have to do more, be whatever, expect of myself in order to get to that next level. And that's oftentimes what I talk about with some of our clients, is that those who are true over like that high, like I've got high achiever, I want to get everything, is like, hey, be mindful of your successes too, because oftentimes you can get trapped in the loop of everything has to be exactly the same and or better in order for me to reach this next level.
Yeah.
So for me, both of, and there were times, and I didn't necessarily realize this at the time, but I was just as much afraid of success as I was of failure.
Yeah, it's almost that self-sabotage that sets in. I talked about that before with some of my listeners, and turning self-sabotage into self-mastery, because sometimes you start getting that success and it feels odd. It almost seems like you're stepping into this new realm, things are going well, and it's like you find ways to sabotage yourself and to bring yourself back to where you were because you're just not used to it. So it's one, how to deal with, yes, the failure, to see it as learning. That was one thing that big for me, because I was like yourself, so hard on myself, a lot of self-talk. And when I failed, when I was young, there was lots of tears. And then I got older, it would turn to anger, right? And it would turn to that. And then it was like I would use the anger to try and fuel me the next time. But then it's that emotional attachment. It's not being zen and logical with how you're handling. So you don't actually go into a really good flow state. You almost try to force things because it's like, oh, I'm going to hit the pitch, this pitch. And it's like, that wasn't the right pitch to hit. If you would have been a little bit more calm and let the game come to you, then necessarily you would have created a better outlook and a better result. So definitely failure was one of the toughest things for me to deal with, because I had so much success as a kid and I was naturally, hitting 500 and going 4 for 4 and making that crazy play. So when I got to the level where you meet your natural competition that's at the same talent or hard work and effort, then you don't get as much consistency with those amazing results. And some people do, but of course, there's so many variables that come into that. Yeah. But failure is probably one of the hardest things for athletes, to be kind to themselves and realize like there's a way to learn from this. If you keep repeating the same failure, now you're making mistakes. But if you're just trying new things, if you put your best effort for it, if you did the right amount of preparation and you're prioritizing the right things, sometimes other people just had a good day and you have to tip your cap. And that's a part of being a good sport, having camaraderie, and as well understanding you learn more sometimes from failure than you do from success. And anyone out there who's reached those, elite levels in sport usually have failed more times than many athletes even are willing to attempt it within their field. So that shows they see it as a learning curve, and that this is a way to make myself better, because this might be a weakness on this end that I failed. So how do I make this a strength? Because their strengths, they do really well, and it feels second nature to do those things. But it's like, well, if I get these better, maybe this will take me to that next level, right? And then adversity for myself, I always loved adversity. I felt like it brought out the good in me and the better, because it channeled. But then sometimes it was, and again, having to use like a little bit of aggression to push through adversity, because there is those nerves and you're feeling a little bit of pressure and you're starting to see scouts in the stands and you're starting to be on ESPN3 and you're starting to see all these things happening, and you have to be very calm and you have to almost like not even let it go to your head. You have to think like, I'm just playing a game in my backyard. And it can be challenging because there's a lot of people who also hype you up. When you're not on the field, you got your friends, your family who talk so highly about you. You go out in public and they're tooting your horn when you talk to, close friends or so. And it can start getting into your head that you're above where you really should be in your mindset and staying grounded. And that keeps you, again, away from all those emotions that want to take over in those times. With success as well, again, something I would write on my hat, kind of on the both sides, was don't let success go to my head, but don't let that failure go to your heart, because that's usually where it tends to go. And, you can have those moments where you're on the top of the world, you hit that walk-off home run, and then the next game you come out and you're feeling a little bit too swaggery in yourself. And next thing you know, you go 0 for 4 and you're like, what happened? Well, you didn't do the right steps in the process that created those other results. You were so focused on, you think it's just going to happen because you had some success. It's like, no, that should fuel you, that you need to continuously do what you're doing because it worked, right? It doesn't mean all of a sudden stop those steps. So that's kind of interesting as well. Now, for mental toughness with you, where would you say your coaches focused on mental toughness? Did they talk about mental toughness? Did they just say, hey, like cliches all the time? Did they really have a way for you guys to work on it just as much as your physical attributes? Did they really dive into it at all?
No,
which is sad because I have the same answer.
Yeah, and but that was also a sign of the times. I
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
necessarily remember either side of the equation. If anything, I would say that there was probably more cliches and, suck it up, get over it, move on.
Figure it out.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, figure it out. You're fine. Just go.
Mm-hmm.
Just do it, right?
Fake it till you make it. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't stand that one.
I can't stand it either.
But no, and that's not a knock to them. Again, I'll date myself. It was the late 90s, early 2000s. It wasn't a part of it. It wasn't part of the equation. We didn't talk about it. In college, we did have a sports psychologist on staff, but he was often brought in more from a team dynamic standpoint versus hey, maybe individuals are, struggling to, deal with failure, deal with adversity, or how to bounce back from success, whatever the case may be. It just wasn't on the radar. And it was really
Mm-hmm.
pretty much just like, put your head down, you're fine, just keep going.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Until maybe I got to university, I started having coaches like recommend some books to read, or some different
Yeah.
people to listen to. But for the most part, you had to go search for it on your own. You had to
Yeah.
kind of feel like, okay, well, I need to work on this. This is something I can tell as a weakness. And for myself, I was very fortunate enough to be physically talented. But at times, the talent physically can only do so much when you're at a certain level of competition. Your mind just becomes your enemy or your friend, either or in the situation.
Yeah.
So it was like trying to figure out, do I listen to Tony Robbins today? Do I listen to Les Brown today? Like just going Eric Thomas. Do I want to get screamed at? Do I want someone to be soft with me? Like I had to learn what I responded well to because, each person has different parents. So
Yeah.
sometimes they had parents that were very stoic, calm, not very emotional, and they respond to that. But then sometimes they need that fire lit under them to kind of like do a little bit more. You're being a little bit too calm, like fire yourself up. And especially in
Mhm.
baseball, there's times where it's like super rah rah, especially college baseball. Everyone's
Yeah.
screaming and
Yeah.
cowbells are ringing and stuff. But then as well, you have the side where it's like you have a coach who needs to be dialed down because there's so much energy going around you that you necessarily need to be brought back grounded and like take a few breaths. So for me, that brings me into, do you have any ways that you talk to your athletes now that when you're in those moments where things start to speed up, what you can do to slow it back down, to allow yourself to feel more in the present and to take control of what you can control?
Yeah. That's a great question. And it really kind of depends on the sport. And the reason I say that, right, is that a sport like swimming, it's like
Mm-hmm.
you're wrapping, depending on how many events you swim, like you could be wrapping 5 to 8 different races into a weekend and or week-long event. So it's like almost each one of those is an individual performance, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But if you've got time to not only prepare but reflect it from a swimming standpoint, there was one of my clients is that she was very good at recognizing when the energy was like mounting to a place that was working against her. And so we
Mm-hmm.
worked a lot on box breathing for her. Like
Mm-hmm.
she could find a quiet corner somewhere in the meet. There's always somewhere you can find yourself, find a space for yourself and just get herself back to calm. That when she was, if
Yeah,
anybody who's not familiar with box breathing, breathing in it's like you envision a box in your mind and you're just
exactly.
following, going, 4 seconds each side.
Yep.
And that really worked for her. For a football player, you don't have that same luxury of,
Yeah.
having, hours or minutes, even hours between events. And so, working on that idea of, for anybody out there who follows Trevor Malwatt, it's that idea of maintaining neutrality. And so I've worked on this not only with my son, but with another client who's a football player of like, how do I show up as my best for this play, right? It's like you obviously can't go back and change the play that just happened. Maybe you fumbled the ball, maybe, it was an incomplete pass, whatever your position was, but it was like, how every time did I get up to the line of scrimmage? Am I allowing myself to give the best that I can for this particular play and being able to remove the emotional attachment from whatever outcome just happened? Great play, bad play, whatever the case may be. The play is over. This is an opportunity. We're either going back to, we're continuing to move down the field and push the defense back, or, we've got to go. And now, we're off the field and our series is over. But it really depends on each individual athlete that we work with and the sport to be able to kind of
Definitely.
maneuver in between those two things. but
Yeah.
it's always really simple. That's the thing about mindset, is that, we have this notion that it's big and it's it is complex because our brain is complex, but the actions you can take oftentimes boil down to a question you ask yourself to snap yourself out of something. Or, one of the things that has worked really well for any athlete in any sport is that the moment that negative self-talk comes up, there are times that if you are used to hearing a lot of negative self-talk, you may not necessarily catch it as quickly. But if you start to, what we work on is understanding what are those messages that you hear. So it brings awareness to the athletes. But the second one is the moment that you hear it, pause and say, what is the exact opposite thought that I just had?
Yes.
So
Yes.
something as simple as, oh, I suck, right? That comes out of athletes' mouths. What's the exact opposite thought? I'm a phenomenal athlete.
I'm
Right.
great.
And
I'm phenomenal. Yeah.
what we always talk about is that you don't have to believe that positive thought right now. What it is, it's getting in the practice of speaking to yourself. One, catching when you're speaking to yourself in a way that isn't helpful. Two, getting used to speaking to yourself in a different way and getting your
Yeah.
brain to stop.
Those are great. Those are excellent. And they're all different, definitely techniques that I start implementing within myself. And then now that I work with clients and athletes, it's bringing all that in. It's controlling the breath. It's changing the thoughts. When you really dive into mindset, it's just where your mind is set on. So if you have a negative thought pop in, which is natural because you're high performance and you have such a high standard, then you have to find a way is, okay, let's combat it with something positive. Let's reassure ourselves we are pretty good, or else we wouldn't be here. Right. And then just take another step forward, and whatever happened, learn from it and try to make an adjustment. And if you keep doing that, I mean, you're going to have great results, or you're going to at least create the best results you could for that time being. Right. There is some times where there needs to be more work put in, or there needs to be more growth in the process. So then we have to respect the grind too that others have put in to create that. And something I love that you have is consistency is what transforms average into excellence. And something I used to always hear was, hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. So along your journey, did you see any athletes or have any clients now that, they're not necessarily the most talented, but they work so hard that they've got themselves to the level where they are with those talented individuals?
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
There were times when I was growing up, well, going back to that as a swimmer, that I would recognize when there were just more talented swimmers
Mm-hmm.
than me. I don't mean to toot my own horn. I worked pretty darn hard.
Yeah.
But it was almost like I would feel this like anger inside of like, you're so talented. If you just like put more into it, right? Like,
Yeah, I
come
feel
on.
that.
Now as a coach to athletes, the majority that I coach are they actually tend to be the talented and the very hardworking. There
To
was
the
one client.
combination. Yeah.
Yes, there was one client who was extremely so talented, and there was even that aha moment that they were talking about. Yeah, as I got older, I realized that people eventually catch up, and they said, "I wish I had listened to mom and dad when they said, hey, we're not trying to diminish your talent, but recognize that as you grow older and as things change and develop, you'll start to see the players that you were beating handedly with no issue. Now you actually have to work a little harder in order to do that. And at some point, they may surpass you." So it was this very beautiful moment for a 17-year-old to say, yeah, I felt it. And I feel as if that was part of why I feel really challenged right now, and the situation that this client is going through. But it was just a beautiful aha moment for someone who's at that stage in their life to say, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I really wish I would have listened.
Yeah, there's those moments where we get humbled, right? And everyone along their journey, somewhere along the road, it might be at the very top, but if you get humbled, it's just normal
Yeah.
because we have this attachment to egos, unfortunately, with athletes, and it's an identity. And
Mhm.
people in society love athletes. They love putting them on the pedestal. They want to get your jersey, they want to buy anything they can to represent themselves with you, right? They love that attachment to, Tom Brady or Aaron Judge or whoever it may be, because they see that there's greatness involved. but they're not understanding how hard they had to work to keep themselves in check. Because there's athletes I see, I watch tennis now a lot more, and someone who could be like the Federer but is not is like Nick Kyrgios. And this guy's
Mhm.
always all over the place with his emotions, and he knows how to play the crowd and everything. And of course, in tennis, like, you can start making all these errors, and next thing you know, you're beating yourself. It's definitely the person who is keeping themselves in check and just doing what they need to do to be in the moment and let things go is usually the one who comes out victorious. It's not always the most talented. And along my journey, I saw people in the baseball realm that you wouldn't say they're the fastest or the biggest or the strongest, but they did things the right way, and they knew how to handle the adversity and being in the limelight and all these things that come along with it. And it was like they were more consistent with their performance because of their mindset, right? And then you had people who were so talented that they didn't necessarily focus on that aspect. So it was like the physical was doing so much for them that it was creating the results. But you get to a certain point where you get humbled, and next thing you know, it's like all of a sudden the world kind of feels on top of you, and you're like, how do I deal with this, right? And that's something a lot of really elite and talented athletes need to understand, is there does come a point where you will reach your level of talent with others, and it only funnels to the best and the best as you go through. Like, I heard a statistic that 1% of high school athletes become NCAA Division I baseball players, and out of that cream of the crop, there's like 0.5% of them go to the next level to play in the minor leagues or get to the big leagues. So you could see it as everyone's going to be throwing mid 90s to 100 miles an hour. Everyone can hit the ball out of the park, but those who can be in the moment and succeed in those pressured situations are the ones that get selected to move on, right? Mm-hmm. And you just sometimes wonder, is it just the talent? Did they work hard as well? Was there a combination of both? And it's kind of interesting along the journey of each different sport and athlete of where and when did they get humbled, that they had to keep their ego in check and just, remember that you need to have fun and keep it a game, and that you're not better than anyone. No one's above or below each other, especially when you step off the field in the court. You should be able to be friendly and kind to an individual. And in sports, it's not always like that. There's always this animosity that gets created, and then arrogance gets involved and emotional attachment, because there's that identity that's connected to their sport. And it's like you go to college, for instance, the baseball team has a certain way they act, and the track team has a certain way they act. And it's like they're attached to this identity. You go to a party and you can tell, like, oh, that's lacrosse, that's hockey, that's football, basketball, just by how they're behaving, because their demeanors, right?
Right.
So it's really interesting, and definitely something that athletes can focus on is just keep yourself grounded, be in tune with the process, remember to have fun. Yes, it seems like you only have such a small window of opportunity, which is why I think there's this, big pressure we put on ourselves, because we only say, I only have so many swim meets. I only have so many games. I have to perform every single game if I want to get to that next level, if I want to be state champ, or if I want to be, the elite champion for Division I or whatever it may be. There's just very little opportunity. So it's definitely a skill to be present and to remember the process and not get focused on just results. Even though the results are what get you to the next level. But it's like, if you lay each brick as best as you can, then naturally you're going to create the best path you could have created. No matter how much you want to get, focused on the results, it will handle itself if you're doing the right things in your practice, in your training. You have good self-talk, you have a good support team around you. And, obviously it helps when you have good coaches and all those other things too. So that's amazing. But do you have anything else to add in at all with mindset or anything you'd like to ask me?
Yeah. So as you were saying, going through all of that, one of the athletes that came out, you had mentioned Tom Brady. And for anybody who has followed for anybody who knows all of Tom Brady's career, I mean, the man has 3 Hall of Fame careers rolled into one. And what you may not know if you're on the younger side of the spectrum is that, he struggled at the University of Michigan and, wasn't necessarily looked at or viewed as the quarterback he became. It's, as you said, it's those bricks he laid along the way that allowed him to figure out how to create this niche for himself in a way. And the same goes for someone like Joe Burrow, for anybody who he's the starting quarterback of the Cincinnati Bengals, and watching his journey. I mean, he went to Ohio State, and it was between him and I'm going to forget what other quarterback, but he was not chosen to be starter. Decided to go into the transfer portal, transferred to LSU. The guy won a national championship, a Heisman, and was the first round of the draft pick. Like, and it, it's all about that resilience and that tenacity and those things that maybe sometimes can't always be taught, but can be fostered. And in a world where you're surrounded by people who allow you to find yourself and find what works for you as an athlete, those are the gems to hold on to, because, it is a space not to allow opinion to infiltrate what goes on in your mind, but staying true to yourself and knowing, hey, the original path I took may not have gotten me what I wanted, but there is another path that I might be able to take, so long as I stay true to myself and what I believe to be most important to me, surrounded by people who will support me in that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And it's amazing to see those athletes who have those great stories, right? Tom Brady, even getting into the NFL, being the backup quarterback, getting on the field because of an injury, and then just grabbing that shine and that limelight and being able to really flourish. But it's because he wasn't necessarily always touted as the best quarterback in the draft and all these things. So he might have had a different mindset of, when I get this opportunity, I'm just going to do the right things. And if I do this consistently, then it's going to put me on the field, and then I can, make a career out of this and not just be the guy who's got the scoreboard telling the other guy what to do, kind of thing. So it's really interesting. And someone I look up to as well, is Tiger Woods. Talk about a mental tough individual. He's got the ability to be so focused and not let all that noise around him. Like, because of Tiger Woods, he's changed golf, right? He's made thousands of people want to come on a golf course to watch. And he's also made other golfers have the opportunity now to make more money, get more sponsorships, more TV time, all these things. And how do you have an athlete who was 4 years old, already on TV, went through all of that process of being in the limelight 24/7, being on TV already at that age, and being said, like, you're going to be the next great. And then to actually walk the path and become it to the point where you're almost as good as Jack Nicklaus. Like, that's an amazing story for me too. But if you look at the background, he had a little bit more of that military background from his dad, and where they bring in certain conditioning and aspects. And in my journey in university, I had a lot of coaches try to implement that military mindset, where it was very much, you go on the line, you do all this conditioning, physical. And when you get to the point where you feel like you're going to puke, well, do that and then keep running, right? And you see, you can push yourself further than you realized for your mind. And it's something that I know in a lot of sports, football, baseball, basketball, conditioning is needed. You need that endurance. You need the ability to have, in the fourth quarter or in the last innings, you have to have enough focus when you're feeling tired to still execute and get the job done. Right. And I know that's why coaches love to do that. And they like a little bit of seeing us suffering. I know they enjoy it somewhat. But at the same time, the values you learn from it are interesting. But there is more than one way to build mental toughness. That builds one aspect, just like being an endurance athlete or the David Goggins style, where it's kind of like, suck it up, keep pushing. If you're in pain, just keep going. But that's not always the case, right? Sometimes you need to go have a nice, soft conversation with an athlete and let them just kind of give everything that they're going through in their life. Maybe there's something in school that they're struggling with. Maybe there's something at home they're struggling with, right? They're away from friends and family, and they don't really know where they fit in this whole environment. So there's so many variables. And that's why I'm glad that I was able to put a book together, The Power of Mental Toughness, which takes a lot of these things we're talking about and the techniques and the mindfulness approach, how you keep yourself very grounded and how you have the things to resort to when things kind of, shit hits the fan and you get sped up or things don't go your way and it starts to spiral. It's like, how do you pause and then do these different techniques or have a different focus, change the thought process? And then next thing you know, you're creating even better results and you're kind of getting back on the wagon. And it's tough because it's all of us, we're going to go through, falling off the path and then finding our way back to it. And then it's like, okay, now I'm here. And then something happens and you fall off again. And it's very tedious, right? And you have to have that passion to fuel the energy to keep doing that. So I really appreciate you jumping on today for the podcast. It was a pleasure having you. You shared so much great information, knowledge, and wisdom. And hopefully maybe we have a part 2 one day and we can dive into some different things as well. But
Absolutely.
yeah, Lauren Ammon, Performance Reimagined, an amazing coach. Anyone out there, check the links we'll have on there posted. And yeah, thank you so much for joining me. And I hope all the best in your endeavors.
Oh, right back at you, Julian. Thank you so much.
You.
This was a great conversation.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.